My name is Claire Bennett. I was 27 when my parents handed my brother a future and handed me $2 like it was a life lesson. I was standing in their kitchen in a quiet Boston suburb the morning before his big celebration, still wearing the sweatshirt I had thrown on after an overnight shift, when my mother slid a folded note across the counter without even looking at me. I thought maybe it was a check, or at least something that said they finally saw what I had done. Instead, inside were two single bills and one sentence written in my father's neat handwriting. Figure it out yourself. It'll make you stronger. I actually stared at it for a second because my brain refused to catch up with what was happening. My brother and I had finished medical school together. Same degree, same finish line, same family name. But somehow he was getting the full proud parent treatment, his loans erased, his party booked. His future toasted like he had done something no one else in the room could understand, while I was being treated like struggle was the gift I was supposed to be grateful for. When I asked how that made any sense, I got the same answer I had been getting my whole life. He needed more help. I was the strong one. He needed support. I would be fine. Then they reminded me not to be late to his debt-free celebration that night. Like showing up to applaud the difference between us was part of my job too. I said I'd be there, even though my chest felt tight enough to crack. Then I walked out to my car, still holding that note, and my phone lit up with a message that changed the entire night. 5 minutes after I walked into that party, nobody was celebrating the way they thought they would be. Before I tell you what that message said and why the whole room went dead silent, I gotta ask you something. You feeling chill, wired, tired, or straight up locked in and ready for this? I really want to know the energy on your side of the screen tonight. Makes the story feel way more real. My brother had always been the easy one to celebrate. Even before we were old enough to understand what favoritism was, I could feel it in the way adults turned toward him first. He had the kind of energy people noticed the moment he walked into a room. He laughed loudly, made friends quickly, and somehow always looked like he belonged exactly where he was. I was quieter. I liked structure, books, and the kind of questions that did not make for exciting dinner conversation. When we were kids, that difference seemed harmless. By the time we were teenagers, it had become the entire family's story. If he scored a goal, my parents took pictures, posted them online, and took us all out for dinner. If I won a science competition, they said they were proud of me and asked if I could warm up leftovers when I got home. I learned early that being impressive in private did not count as much as being exciting in public. My brother got attention because he was charismatic. I got expectations because I was reliable. When he turned 18, he got a car with a giant red bow parked in the driveway. When I turned 18 3 months later, I got a planner and a lecture about being practical. My mother said I was mature enough to understand that not every gift had to be flashy. My father said I was lucky because character mattered more than luxuries. It was always framed like wisdom when it was really just unequal treatment dressed up in calm voices. The strangest part was that I did not hate my brother for any of it. He was never cruel to me when we were kids. Sometimes he even looked uncomfortable when our parents made it obvious. But he never pushed back either. He never said maybe Claire deserves this too. He never told them to come to my state science finals instead of another one of his games. He accepted the version of our family that worked in his favor, and over time, that silence became its own kind of choice. By high school, our futures were already being written differently inside the same house. He was the one people described as promising. I was the one people described as capable. Those two words sound similar until you live inside them. Promising gets support. Capable gets left alone. When we both said we wanted to go into medicine, my parents reacted like it confirmed what they had always believed. My brother, they said, had the people skills to become a doctor everyone loved. I had the discipline to survive hard things without much help. That was when I first realized they were not just favoring him. They were building an entire philosophy around why it was reasonable. He was their investment. I was their proof that neglect could be called strength if you use the right tone. The older we got, the more that message followed me. If I solved a problem on my own, it was evidence that I did not need support. If he struggled, it was evidence that he deserved more of it. Every time I adapted, the standard moved farther away. Every time he stumbled, the family closed ranks around him. And somehow, by the end of high school, everyone acted like that was just how life worked. I was the strong one. He was the one who needed a little more. Looking back now, I think that was the lie that shaped everything that came after. College made the difference between us impossible to ignore. We both got into strong pre-med programs, and for a while I thought maybe being away from home would level things out. It did not. My brother called my parents whenever he was stressed about a class, and somehow a solution appeared almost immediately. A tutor, extra money, a visit, encouragement, a speech about how brilliant he was and how setbacks happen to every future leader. When I called, I got advice. When he called, he got resources. That was the pattern. I worked at a coffee shop before morning labs and picked up shifts on weekends to cover rent and books. I learned exactly how long I could make one tank of gas last and exactly which grocery store near campus marked down produce on Thursday nights. I stayed up until 2 in the morning studying for chemistry exams and still showed up to volunteer at the hospital because I knew that if I wanted to compete, I had to be more than excellent. I had to be undeniable. My brother struggled more in some of the foundational science courses. My parents paid for private tutoring without hesitation. When he needed an expensive prep course for the MCAT, they called it an investment in his future. When I scored high the first time using used books, library materials, and practice exams I found online, my father nodded and said, "That sounds like you." It was never congratulations the way it was for him. It was never delight. It was almost worse than being openly dismissed because it was like my success was treated as emotionally convenient for everyone else. I was easy. I was low maintenance. I was the child they did not have to worry about. And somehow that became permission not to show up. What hurt most was not the money itself. It was what the money represented. Every check written on his behalf said, "We believe your dream matters." Every dollar withheld from me said, "Prove, you deserve to be seen." By the time we got into medical school, I was already carrying loans that made my stomach tighten every time I opened my account. My brother entered that same world with a lighter load because our parents had paid for more than half of what came before. I entered it with debt, exhaustion, and the stubborn belief that if I just kept going, eventually the truth would become too obvious to ignore. Med school was brutal for both of us, but not in the same way. We both studied. We both suffered through sleepless weeks and high-pressure rotations. But when he hit a wall, people rushed in. When I hit a wall, I reorganized my life and kept moving. I made coffee at 5 in the morning before lectures. I took notes so detailed that classmates asked to borrow them. I volunteered for extra clinical hours because I needed recommendation letters strong enough to compete with people who had family connections and financial breathing room. My brother still worked hard, but he worked hard on a different foundation. He had time to recover. He had the mental space that comes from knowing someone will catch you if you fall. I had none of that. And still, I stayed near the top of the class. Not because anyone cleared the path for me, but because I stopped expecting anyone would. There were moments I almost convinced myself it was fine. My brother and I still laughed together sometimes. We still shared notes, quizzed each other before exams, and grabbed late-night food after long hospital shifts. He was not my enemy, but every so often, something would happen that snapped me back into reality. My parents flew in for one of his white coat milestones and took photos like he was the first person in our bloodline to wear one. They missed my research presentation the next month because my mother said the drive would be too much back to back. When I was selected for a competitive clinical research track, they asked whether it would interfere with my ability to rest. When he was invited to a networking dinner, they booked flights immediately. It was not one giant betrayal, it was death by 1,000 small decisions. And every one of those decisions pointed in the same direction. He was being prepared to shine. I was being trained to endure. By the start of our final years, I had stopped wondering whether they saw the difference. They saw it. They just preferred the version of the story where their son needed them more than their daughter did. That story made them feel generous. The truth would have forced them to ask harder questions about who they had failed. Everything started to change the year I met Dr. Evelyn Carter. She was one of those people who could walk into a trauma bay full of noise, blood, and panic, and make the whole room feel more focused without raising her voice. She did not waste words. She did not flatter people. She did not care about charm the way so many others in medicine seem to. She cared about precision, judgment, and whether you showed up fully prepared. The first time I worked with her on a rotation, she asked me 3 questions in a row about a patient case and waited while I thought through every answer instead of rushing to fill the silence. When I finished, she gave one small nod and said, "Good. You are actually thinking, not performing." That one sentence landed harder than any compliment I had received in years. Most people noticed who took up space. She noticed who could hold pressure without collapsing. I started spending more time in the clinical innovation lab she supervised, helping with a research project on improving emergency response outcomes in high-risk trauma cases. At first, I was just grateful to be included. Then I realized she was giving me more responsibility than anyone else at my level. She trusted me to see patterns in data that others missed. She let me help build the framework for a study that later drew serious attention from the department. I was still exhausted all the time, still juggling more than I wanted to admit, but for the first time, I felt like my effort was turning into something bigger than survival. Dr. Carter did not tell me I was strong so she could walk away. She challenged me because she respected my mind enough to expect more from it. That difference changed me. She also saw far more of my family dynamic than I realized. My parents attended a few department events during that final year, mostly the ones where my brother would be visible to the right people. They were always polished, always warm, always eager to talk about his future in a way that made them sound supportive and visionary. If my name came up, it was in the same soft tone they had used my whole life. Claire has always been independent. Claire never needs much. Claire is just naturally good at handling things on her own. The first time Dr. Carter heard that, I saw something shift in her expression. She did not react outwardly, but later, while we were reviewing data in her office, she asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Has your family always mistaken neglect for confidence in you?" I laughed because I did not know what else to do. Then I said yes. That was the moment I stopped pretending the situation was too subtle to name. Over the next several months, I became one of her primary research fellows. She pushed me harder than anyone ever had. She made me defend my conclusions, clean up weak reasoning, and stop apologizing every time I entered a room where I belonged. She taught me that competence did not need to arrive smiling and grateful. It could arrive prepared. It could arrive calm. It could arrive after years of being underestimated and still be impossible to dismiss. Meanwhile, my brother kept moving through the system in the way he always had. He made connections easily. He impressed people in interviews. He looked exactly like the kind of future doctor families trusted within 5 minutes of meeting him. Our parents loved that. They had already started talking about the kind of physician leader he could become, the kind who chaired committees and charmed donors and rose quickly because people liked him. What they never seemed to notice was that underneath his confidence, there were cracks. He had begun relying on their approval the same way I had spent years starving for it. Their support had not made him stronger. It had made him dependent on being reinforced. I do not think he fully understood that yet. I barely did. But I could see enough to know that the difference between us was no longer just emotional. It was structural. I had built an inner life around discipline, restraint, and the ability to keep going without applause. He had built a public life around attention, momentum, and the assumption that someone would clear the next obstacle. Both can get a person far. Only one survives well when the room changes. Near the end of that year, after one especially difficult shift, Dr. Carter asked me to stay behind. She closed the door to her office, handed me a bottle of water, and said there are a few programs and awards that do not care whose child you are or who paid your bills. They only care whether your work matters. I want your name in front of them. I did not know it yet. But that conversation was the beginning of the end of the version of my life my parents had written for me. The message I got in the car that morning was from Dr. Carter. She asked if I could come by her office before noon because she had news she did not want to deliver over the phone. I drove there with the $2 still in my bag, and that note still folded in half, like it might somehow make more sense if I waited long enough. It did not. Her assistant smiled when I arrived and said congratulations before I had even sat down. And for one strange second, I thought maybe she had mistaken me for someone else. Then Dr. Carter walked in holding a folder and shut the door behind her. "Claire," she said, "I just got confirmation. You have been selected for the National Clinical Innovation Award, and the Hospital Foundation approved the attached loan repayment grant tied to your trauma systems research. On top of that, the residency track you ranked first wants to make you an early leadership offer." For a second, I could not speak. I just sat there staring at her while my whole body went cold and hot at the same time. It was not just one door opening. It was years of locked doors giving way all at once. My work had mattered, not privately, not quietly, publicly, formally, in writing. Enough to wipe out the debt that had been hanging over me like a second job I had not started paying yet. Enough to put me in a position no one could honestly call lucky. Doctor. Carter let me have my silence for a moment. Then she said something that changed the shape of the day. "I was invited to the celebration tonight. Your parents sent department invitations around earlier this week because they are clearly trying to make an impression on several people who will matter for your brother." I kept looking at her. She knew exactly what that sentence meant. "If they use tonight to present a false version of what happened," she said, "I am not willing to sit in that room and help them do it." I asked her what she meant, even though I already knew. She set the folder down in front of me and leaned back in her chair. "I mean that if they are going to publicly celebrate one child while minimizing the other in front of the same professional community that has watched you work, I am prepared to correct the record." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Part of me wanted that so badly it scared me. Another part of me still wanted to protect everyone from the truth I had spent years swallowing. I said I did not want to look bitter. I said I did not want to hijack my brother's night. Dr. Carter gave me a look so steady it made me sit up straighter. "Claire," she said, "truth is not theft. If someone built an event on an unfair narrative, the collapse of that narrative is not your wrongdoing. It is the consequence of reality showing up." I left her office carrying the folder like it was both a victory and a live wire. Halfway back to my car, my phone buzzed again. This time it was my brother. He wrote, "I know tonight is weird. Just please do not make it tense. Mom is already emotional and Dad wants this to go smoothly." I read it twice, not because it was complicated, but because it confirmed what I had never fully let myself say out loud. He knew. Maybe not everything, maybe not the full weight of what it had cost me, but he knew enough to understand the night was built on something crooked, and his first instinct was still to protect the event, not me. I did not answer right away. I sat in my car and looked through the windshield at a row of strangers crossing the street, living their own lives, not knowing that mine had split into a before and after without asking my permission. When I finally texted back, all I wrote was, "I will be there." The rest of the afternoon felt unreal. My mother sent a photo of the table arrangements and reminded me to dress appropriately. My father sent a message about how important this evening would be for family pride. Nobody asked how I was. Nobody asked whether I had plans after graduation, whether I was okay, whether I had any good news of my own. It was as if the role they had assigned me was so fixed that nothing else could enter it. The daughter who could take it. The daughter who would clap politely. The daughter whose effort only mattered when it made other people comfortable. By the time I got dressed that evening, I was not shaking anymore. I was tired in a way that felt almost clean. For years, I had kept waiting for the right private conversation, the right calm moment, the right emotional tone that might finally make my parents understand what they had done. But families like mine do not usually change in private. Private is where they excuse themselves. Public is where reality corners them. And somewhere deep down, I think I knew that by the time I stepped into that harbor club, the version of me they counted on was already gone. The celebration was at a private club overlooking the water in the seaport, the kind of place people rented when they wanted an event to look effortless and expensive at the same time. The host stand had a gold-framed welcome sign with my brother's full name in elegant lettering and the words, "Debt-free doctor," beneath it. Nothing about that phrasing even made sense if you thought about it for more than 2 seconds, but most people do not think hard when money and confidence are dressed up nicely enough. The room itself looked like every polished family lie I had grown up inside. Candlelight, white flowers, city views, a slideshow already playing on one wall with baby pictures, sports photos, graduation shots, and carefully chosen family moments where he was always centered and everyone else existed as background. I was in a navy dress that made me feel older than I was and calmer than I felt. The moment I walked in, my mother looked relieved. Not to see me, but to see that I had not become a problem yet. She kissed my cheek and immediately asked if I could speak to one of the servers because the vegetarian place cards had been moved, and your cousin is impossible about food. That was the first thing she said to me. Not "you look beautiful," not "thank you for coming," not "how are you." I stood there for one beat too long, then nodded and did it because old habits do not die the second you notice them. Across the room, my father was introducing my brother to two department leaders with a hand on his shoulder, like he had personally manufactured the future. My brother looked good, relaxed on the surface, tense around the eyes if you knew him well. When he saw me, he gave a small smile that was half apology and half request for peace. I did not return it. I just walked toward the seating area after talking to the staff and took in the room the way I had learned to take in every room that might turn dangerous. Dr. Carter arrived 10 minutes later in a dark green dress and the kind of composure that made people move slightly when she walked by without understanding why. My father hurried over to greet her with almost exaggerated warmth. He was thrilled she had come. To him, she was another impressive name in the audience for the story he wanted to tell. I watched their interaction from across the room and saw the exact moment he realized she was not there to play her assigned part. It was subtle. Just a pause. A slight recalculation behind his eyes. He recovered quickly, but I saw it. I think she wanted me to see it too. Dinner was called soon after, and the seating chart told the whole truth before anyone spoke a word. My brother was at the head table with my parents, two department chairs, a hospital donor, and Dr. Carter. I was placed at a side table with extended relatives and family friends. Not hidden exactly, just ranked. Everyone pretended not to notice. That was always the cruelty of it. The hierarchy was obvious, but politeness was used to erase accountability. I sat down, unfolded my napkin, and felt something inside me go very still. This was not accidental. None of it was. My father opened the formal remarks after the first course, standing with a champagne glass in one hand and a smile that looked practiced enough to belong on local television. He spoke about sacrifice, family, and pride. He spoke about how meaningful it was to see his son step into medicine unburdened by debt, ready to serve, ready to lead, ready to make a difference. Then he said the line that turned the room cold inside me. We always knew which of our children needed a stronger foundation, and tonight we are proud to say we gave him one. A few people clapped. A few glanced at me, and then away. My mother took over next and somehow made it worse. She described my brother as the child who carried the family's future in a visible way, the one who brought people together, the one who inspired others. Then, with that same pleasant voice I had heard my whole life, she added that not every child needs the same kind of investment. Some are simply built to make it on their own. It was the cleanest public version yet of the thing they had done to me for years. They were not just praising him, they were explaining why I had deserved less. My brother stood up before the applause had fully died. He did not look happy now. He looked trapped. He thanked everyone for coming, thanked our parents, thanked the faculty members who had made time to be there. Then he stopped. I watched him look at my parents, then at me. There was a long enough pause that the room shifted. Finally, he said, "There is something about tonight that does not feel right to me." My mother whispered his name under her breath, sharp and warning. He kept going. Claire and I crossed the same finish line. She worked just as hard as I did. Harder, honestly. There were murmurs then. Small ones, the kind that spread fast in rooms full of educated people who already suspect more than anyone has said. My father stood halfway from his chair and let out a quick laugh that sounded brittle. "What your brother means," he said, "is that we are proud of both our children, but tonight is simply about one specific milestone. Debt-free because you paid for it," my brother said, and this time his voice was steadier. "I did not earn that the way everyone here is being encouraged to think I did." The room had gone completely quiet. My mother's face had lost color. She tried to smile like he was being humble, like this was all charming and under control, but nothing about the air felt controlled anymore. Then Dr. Carter rose from her chair. She did not raise her glass. She did not ask permission. She simply stood and spoke in the same calm tone she used in an operating room when everyone else was panicking. "Since honesty seems to have entered the room, perhaps this is the appropriate moment to share a fuller picture of the Bennett family achievements this year." No one moved. No one even reached for a drink. She looked directly at me first, almost as if to anchor me, then turned toward the room. "Claire Bennett has just been awarded the National Clinical Innovation Award for her work on trauma response systems, a distinction granted to one of the strongest graduating candidates in her cohort." The board also approved a major loan repayment grant tied directly to her research contributions, which means the debt she carried through medical school will be cleared not by parental preference, but by merit. You could almost feel the room pivot. It was physical. Heads turning, shoulders straightening. The current shifted in one instant from staged admiration to real attention. But Dr. Carter was not finished. She continued by saying that Claire had also received an early leadership track offer from the residency program she ranked first, and that several aspects of the clinical innovation project now being discussed across the department had been developed from Claire's analysis and fieldwork. Then she said the sentence that cracked everything wide open. "I have worked with many students who knew how to impress a room. Far fewer know how to carry responsibility, withstand pressure, and produce excellent work without being protected from hardship." Claire did all of that while financing her own path through a system that made room for others far more easily than it made room for her. The silence after that was almost louder than applause. Then the applause came anyway. Strong, immediate, not polite. Real. People turned toward me fully now. One of the department chairs stood. Then another. A donor at the head table leaned toward Dr. Carter and asked a question about my project. Someone at my side table said, "My God, Claire, why did no one tell us?" I almost laughed at that because the answer was sitting in the center of the room looking stunned. My father tried first. He stood quickly and said, "Of course we are proud of Claire too. This is wonderful news. Absolutely wonderful." As though pride announced after public embarrassment could pass for the genuine thing. My mother followed with something about how every child has different needs and how Claire has always been self-motivated. That was when Dr. Carter turned toward them with the kind of controlled expression that usually meant she was about to end a discussion in one sentence. "There is a difference," she said, "between believing a child is capable and deciding that her silence makes her easier to overlook." Nobody rescued them after that. Nobody could. The room had seen too much in too little time. My brother sat back down and covered his mouth with one hand, like he had just finally heard the full sound of his own life. Guests began leaving their seats to come toward me. A senior attending asked about my next steps. One of the department leaders who had spent the first half of the evening talking almost exclusively to my brother asked if we could set up time to discuss my research after graduation. A woman from the hospital foundation congratulated me and said she had heard my name before from people who respected my work. That sentence stayed with me because it meant recognition had been building around me quietly for a long time. My parents just had not been the ones listening. The most surreal part was watching my mother try to re-enter the news story forming in real time. She touched my arm and told one group, "Claire has always amazed us." It was the same voice she used when introducing my brother to important people. But it landed differently now. There was no warmth in it, only panic. My father started telling someone at the next table that he had always taught both his children resilience, and I actually saw one of the department chairs look at him with thinly disguised disappointment. That was the moment I knew the consequences would last longer than one night. This was not just embarrassment. This was credibility breaking in public. My brother found me a few minutes later near the windows overlooking the harbor. The room behind us was still buzzing, but for the first time that night, he looked like no one special. Just a tired young man standing inside a story that had gone farther than he expected. He said, "I am sorry," and I believed him. Then he said something I had waited years to hear from someone in my family. They did not support me more because I was better. They supported me more because it made them feel good to be needed. And I let them. I looked at him for a long moment and said, "Yes, you did." He nodded once, like he deserved that answer. Across the room, our parents were still trying to recover, still smiling too much, still talking too quickly, still realizing that the audience they had gathered for a celebration had become witnesses instead. And standing there with the city lights reflected in the glass beside me, I understood something that made it easier to breathe. I did not have to destroy them. I did not even have to argue. All I had to do was remain standing while the truth finished its work. The fallout started before the night was even over. The event did not end with some dramatic screaming match or a shattered glass or anything people would call theatrical. It ended with something much worse for my parents. It ended with people quietly changing their minds about them. In families like mine, image is everything. My parents had spent years building the reputation of being generous, polished, deeply involved, the kind of people who raised successful children through wisdom and sacrifice. What that room saw instead was a couple who had funded one child loudly and justified starving the other emotionally and financially by calling it confidence. No amount of smiling could put that back together by dessert. Over the next week, the change became impossible to miss. Colleagues who normally responded to my mother's messages right away took longer. My father stopped getting the same eager tone from people he had once charmed easily. Friends who loved being invited into their perfect family orbit suddenly seemed to have other plans. Nobody confronted them in some clean, dramatic way. They just became harder to impress, harder to believe. That was the consequence they could not control. My brother called me 2 days later and asked if we could meet somewhere neutral. We ended up in a small coffee shop near the hospital where no one cared who our parents were. He looked tired, stripped down somehow, like the performance part of him had finally cracked, and no one had rushed in to repair it. He told me he had been thinking about everything that had happened and everything that had happened before it. He said the attention he got growing up had felt good, then normal, then necessary. He admitted that somewhere along the way, he started measuring himself by how well our parents reacted to him. He said that when he saw the room turn toward me at the club, it hurt at first, not because he hated me, but because he realized how dependent he had become on being the chosen one. That honesty mattered to me more than tears would have. I told him I was not interested in hearing that he had not known. I needed him to own the parts he had known and still accepted. To his credit, he did. He said I should have spoken sooner. I should have refused the version of success they built around me. I should have noticed what it cost you. I told him apology was a start, not a repair. Repair would mean building a life where he no longer let comfort excuse silence. He nodded and said he understood. For the first time in years, I believed we had a chance at a real relationship, not because everything was fixed, but because neither of us was pretending anymore. My parents, on the other hand, tried to move backward almost immediately. They came by my apartment with gifts. My mother brought a leather portfolio she said she had been saving for the right moment. My father brought a watch that looked expensive enough to act like history had a price tag. They stood in my living room and used every version of the same argument. We always loved you. We did what we thought was best. We knew you were strong. We never meant to hurt you. I listened to all of it, and what struck me most was how carefully they still avoided the central truth. They did hurt me. Repeatedly. Predictably. Conveniently. And the phrase "we knew you were strong" was still being used like a moral shield. Finally, I said something I had never been able to say as a child, because children are trained to protect the adults who fail them. Calling one child strong does not give you permission to abandon her. My mother started crying then, but even her tears did not move me the way they once would have. I was not cruel. I was just done being reachable through guilt. I thanked them for coming. I told them I needed distance. When my father tried to say family should stay together, I answered with the quietest truth I had. Family should not require one person to disappear so the others can feel comfortable. 3 months later, I moved for residency and started building a life that finally felt like mine. It was not magically easy. I was still working impossible hours. I was still tired more often than not. But the exhaustion felt different when it was attached to purpose instead of proving I deserved a place in the room. I had colleagues who respected me, mentors who challenged me honestly, and a future built on work no one could rewrite as someone else's generosity. My brother and I kept in touch. Slowly, carefully. He started making choices without asking our parents to validate them first. He was not transformed overnight, but he was trying, and trying counts when it is real. My parents sent packages twice after I moved. The first one had handwritten notes tucked between expensive things, the kind of notes people write when they want forgiveness to look organized. The second had a framed family photo from years earlier, one of those smiling holiday pictures that capture appearance better than truth. I thanked them for thinking of me and sent both back. Not because I wanted revenge one more time, but because healing is not the same thing as reopening the door to the people who taught you to doubt your worth. That, more than anything, became the lesson of the whole story. Real love does not keep score by who seems easier to neglect. Real support does not flow only toward the child who is louder, weaker, more visible, or more flattering to a parent's ego. And being the strong one is not a compliment when it is used to justify withholding care. A lot of people grow up hearing that the quiet child will be fine, the responsible child can handle it, the mature child does not need as much. But those children remember. They remember every missed moment, every practical excuse, every time their pain was renamed as resilience because it was more convenient for someone else. If there is any value in what happened to me, it is this: strength should be nurtured, not exploited. Independence should be respected, not punished. And no family gets to call itself loving while only investing in the child who reflects back the image it prefers. The strangest part is that my father was right about one thing in that note. I did figure it out myself, but not because his cruelty taught me some noble lesson. I figured it out because eventually I stopped mistaking their approval for oxygen. I stopped waiting to be chosen by people who needed me small in order to feel generous. And once I did that, everything changed. So, if you have ever been the child everyone assumed would be fine, I hope you hear this clearly. Your ability to survive without help does not mean you deserved less of it. And sometimes the most important education life gives us is learning that our value does not shrink just because the wrong people failed to recognize it.